name is Oliver Poole, and this is my final presentation. I hope you like it. First, we're going to take a look at Egypt and Pharaoh's role in society. A pharaoh could be either a man or a woman. You were not discriminated against if you were a female pharaoh. If you were the pharaoh, you were the pharaoh, and nobody cared what gender you were. In Egyptian religion, there were numerous gods, all of them with animal heads, like this one. In Egypt, the pharaoh was seen as a god king. In Egyptian religion, that meant that the pharaoh was the host of a god. To host a god is to have a little bit of the god put inside of you, and then it becomes part of your essence, and you become the god. The pharaoh was supposedly one with the god Horus, but only if the pharaoh was male. If you were a female pharaoh, you were one with the god Isis, seen here. She was the queen of the gods. The most important of the gods was Ra, the sun god. Fun fact, Egypt was briefly monotheistic, and they worshipped only Ra, the sun god. But after the pharaoh that put that into place passed away, they went back to their old religions with all of these gods. The pharaoh was embalmed and put in a pyramid-shaped tomb after death. They were honored a lot because they were gods, and also they were kings. The bodies were to be preserved so that they could be used by the dead person in the afterlife. And probably the most famous buildings of this time were the pyramids at Giza. Those were some very important tombs for very important pharaohs. Next, we're going to take a look at trade, farming, and economics. Egyptian trade had a large impact on the economy, obviously, and irrigation from the yearly floods of the Nile made the soil very rich in minerals, improving the harvest, which allowed them extra grain to trade. The Egyptian sea trade was especially helpful to the economy. The Egyptians traded many things overseas, including cheese and wine and grain. Trade on land was made much easier when the Mesopotamians invented the wheel, like this, except it was made of stone. Next, we're going to take a look at the Egyptian military. The main military unit of the Egyptians was the war chariot. It was a chariot pulled by 2 horses, and there was one man in the chariot to control the chariot and maneuver the chariot, and another to actually do the fighting, armed with either a bow or a javelin. And the infantry consisted of men with cowskin shields and swords and no armor, and the archers had a bow and no armor. The Egyptians did not use much armor. If they used any armor, it was leather straps. The only armor that they had was their shields. Next, we're going to look at society. The pharaoh is at the top of the pyramid. He's the most important. Then we have the government officials, who are the pharaoh's advisors and such. And then the soldiers and the scribes, which are one of the only classes that know how to write in Egypt. And then we have the merchants and artisans, and then the farmers, and then the slaves. The slaves could be attained by taking over other nations and taking captives. Next, we're going to look at Greece and the major forms of government in Greece. We have the democracy, invented and used in Athens and their colonies, which was ruled by the people, or elected officials elected by the people, which means that basically they ruled it. Then we have the militaristic oligarchy, and Sparta, ruled by the military and important generals and such. Now we're going to be looking at the consequences of the rivalries between the city-states. Sparta had many wars with Athens as a result of their cultural and political differences. Athens encouraged philosophy and art, whereas Sparta encouraged fitness and strength, and frankly, they both despised each other's way of life, which led to much conflict between the two city-states. Greek trade was vital to the economy for many city-states, especially Athens, which we will talk about later. Now we're going to be looking at the Greek sea trade. The Greek sea trade was essential to many of the economies of Greece, and especially the economy of the city-state Athens. The Greek trading vessel of choice was the trireme. The trireme was also a military vessel, but because of its large capacity for military units, it was also used for trading because there was a lot of room for trade goods. The Greeks traded many things, including cheese, olive oil, and wine. The Greeks had 12 major gods and numerous minor gods. The most powerful of the major gods were thought to be Hades, god of the underworld, Poseidon, god of the sea, and Zeus, god of lightning and king of the universe. Next, we're going to be talking about the Greek slave trade. Slaves were very important in Greece and especially important in Athens because they worked in quarries and in silver mines. They quarried the stone to make the blocks of stone to build structures, and they mined silver to mint the coins to pay the builders. Athens and many other city-states would not function without slavery. Slaves were often accumulated by waging wars on neighboring city-states and taking captives. Greek philosophy. Philosophy was especially important in ancient Greece. Philosophy was highly valued in most city-states, and the three most famous philosophers seen here are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The legacy of Greece. Greek art and drama still affect our lives today, and Greek architecture affects how buildings are constructed today. Here is a reconstruction of the Parthenon, and here is the Field Museum in Chicago. They are very similar in the way that they are built. Now we're going to look at Rome and the Empire and Republic. The empire in Rome was ruled by one man. It was a very militaristic government. The man was usually a general, and the Republic was ruled by an oligarchy of wealthy men. Christianity in Rome. Christianity had lots of appeal in Rome because it offered salvation to everyone and not just the nobility. It became even more widespread when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity. When Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, everybody else wanted to become Christian too, like the emperor. Attaining an empire. Rome had a very powerful military. Rome was able to maintain their large territory with their military. And because the Roman territory was so large, they were able to have taxes levied on all parts of their empire, which allowed them more tax money to put towards the military, which allowed them to expand militarily, which led to more land, which led to more taxes, which led to more military. So in theory, that was how it worked, or how it was supposed to work. Legacy of Rome. Roman roads and buildings still stand today. They invented the paved roads. The Romans invented the bathhouse and running water, taking water from one place to another via aqueduct. Evidence of Rome's conquest still remains today. You can find Roman artifacts in Britain and North Africa and Spain and Egypt. Everywhere that Rome was, it left traces. Now we're going to look at the Byzantine failure and the early Middle Ages. The Byzantine Empire was constantly under pressure from Muslims and others, including the Germanic tribes and barbarians. The Fourth Crusade was turned on Constantinople and the city was pillaged. The Byzantine Empire failed again and again to retake the Western Empire and Rome, and Constantinople eventually fell to the Muslims. The rise of Islam. Muslims went everywhere to trade and spread their religion, everywhere they went. And their military was very formidable. Christianity after the fall of Rome. We've already talked about the Muslims and the Christians, but now we're going to talk about the barbarian invasion. The barbarian invasion was welcomed by the church because they thought that the barbarians would convert, and indeed they did. Many barbarians were converted. Monasteries were set up and were a source of wealth and trade, despite having the monks being supposed to live humbly. Christian missionaries were sent to all parts of Europe. Now we're going to look at Christianity and Islam and what they have in common. Both of the religions were monotheistic. Jerusalem was a holy site in both, and both were extremely influential in Europe and some of Asia. Muslims were especially influential in Asia or in Arabia and North Africa. Christianity was most prominent in Europe. The broken up Western Empire. The fall of Rome sent ripples through the conquered territories. Rome was lost as an economic power. Many an economy collapsed as a result of the fall of the Western Empire. Rome was an extremely populous and had many commerce and was a center of trading. And when it fell, there were many economies that just stopped working. But once Roman territories were freed, new countries arose like France, Germany, and Britain. Crusades in the High Middle Ages. The Crusades were holy wars encouraged by the papacy. There were 8 crusades, the most important of which, I think, are below. The First Crusade was an overall success because they achieved their objective, which was taking the Holy Land and Jerusalem. Whereas the Fourth Crusade was an overall failure because the objective, which was also Jerusalem and the Holy Land, which had by then been taken back by the Muslims, was a failure because they found that they were unable to take it back, so the attack was turned on Constantinople and the city fell. Trading and economics. The Crusades allowed Europe to see what lies beyond Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire. Remember that most Europeans did not know what the other side of the world looked like. Trade routes were established after the Crusades. Muslims and Italians were expert traders and merchants and traveled as far as China. One of the most famous is Marco Polo, whose hometown was Venice. Medieval society. At the bottom of the pyramid, we have the peasants and the serfs. The serfs were like slaves, except they could not be bought or sold. A peasant was free to move around and look for work from manor to manor. Next, we have the merchants, the farmers, and the craftsmen. Then all of the other classes above them were all free to do as they wish, but what's notable is that the Pope and the Church touch every tier of the pyramid. Monasteries farmed for themselves and did not buy grain. And once they had stockpiled enough grain, they sold it and made enough eventually to hire laborers to farm for themselves. And Eventually, the monasteries became a source of wealth and were a massive help to the economy. Next, we're going to be looking at religion. The papacy was extremely influential in Europe and was influential enough to preach the crusade. The papacy was very influential in Europe. St. Francis was very influential in parts of Europe which were pagan, and he converted many. Next, we're going to take a look at courtly love. Western Europe introduced the concept of courtly love in the 12th century. The concept of courtly love depicts a man who is in love with an untouchable woman, whether because of social status or because she is married to another man. Then the man shows affection in other ways. For example, he performs well in tournaments or in battle in her honor. Gothic art. Gothic art, such as the cathedral at Chartres, was made mostly in the High Middle Ages. Gothic art gives a reaching for the sky feeling because the goal was to build as high as they could get away with. The Renaissance and the late Middle Ages. The Renaissance gave rise to new technology, art, and music. The Renaissance brought old ideas back. The Renaissance revitalized culture in the late medieval period. Venice. Venice had a powerful navy and was protected on all sides by shallow water. Venice attracted many traders, many of whom were Muslim. Venice was a very rich city because of trade. The Black Death. The Black Death affected all of Europe and some of Asia, and it killed 30 to 60% of the population in Europe. It was spread by fleas and rats. New technology. Gunpowder, printing, and the compass. The magnetic compass was extremely influential in maritime travel because it made transatlantic voyages much easier, and you knew where you were and you didn't have to look at the stars or anything. The printing press was very important because it made books cheaper, and it meant that you did not have to copy out a book yourself or buy it for an expensive price. And then we have gunpowder. Gunpowder put an end to the Castle Age because gunpowder easily made castles obsolete because stone will not stop a heavy metal projectile flying very fast. That concludes my final presentation. I hope you liked it.